Welcome to the Sedona Soul Sisters show, down-to-earth discussions on metaphysics, spirituality, paranormal, and healing topics. The Sedona Soul Sisters are the most trusted psychic mediums in Sedona, Arizona. We are Rosalind Reynolds, myself, Ivory Lanou, Melissa Brace, and Terri-ann Russell. We have offices in Sedona, Arizona, where we see clients from all over the world. Today's topic is solar flares and the effects that it has on sensitive people. If you pop into the show and you want to ask a question live, that's totally fine. You can raise your hand, we'll unmute you, or you can also put the question in the chat room, which is off to the right of your screen. You can see a little button at the bottom that says chat. If you're watching or listening later and you have questions, just send us an email. That email is in the show description. So, wow, solar flares. This is a topic of frequent discussion at our office, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
It's usually Raj saying, "Oh my God, these solar flares. I can't take it."
You know, the weird thing is, I know they're magnetic with the Earth's magnetic field, but I feel them before I ever see them posted on the internet or anything. I start getting all like, kind of like brain foggy, and sometimes I have really bad vertigo, and I'm thinking, okay, why am I getting vertigo, etc. So they are affecting you before you ever even know they're affecting you, I think.
Can you start by telling what people, if they're not sure or don't know what solar flares are, what are they?
Well, I follow this stuff and have for a few years after I figured out how much it affected me. But basically, it's a coronal mass eruption. Basically, it's like an explosion on the face of the sun. Now, the sun, the more you learn about the sun, the more you're just mind boggled at all the things going on with that situation. But the sun has an incredible magnetic field. So these eruptions, when they occur, you can actually, NASA and some of the other space, outer space cameras and all that will show pictures of these, and it's a giant flare. It's literally a giant, it looks like somebody set off a giant propane lighter or something, and it extends out extremely far in itself, but it also is sending out a huge magnetic shift that's going on, and frequencies, frequently the frequencies start going crazy, which means that it impacts us very directly, because our whole electronic and technical world, all of our satellites, all of our, everything, the internet, everything we have established on Earth is impacted by these. So even though you think, that's not a part of my life, it actually can have a tremendous impact just on daily functioning. I mean, our cell phones go into a tizzy, our computers, it's pretty amazing.
I know if you look online about the effects of solar flares on the scientific sites, it's all about what it does to possibility to electronics, things of that sort. But then if somebody asks the question, can it affect humans? No, it can't affect humans. But yeah, that's silly. I mean, that's like, to me, it makes sense if you think about how astrological alignment of planets changes things for us, and the people who pay attention to that and how they feel and what happens in their life and how people react to them and just things going on in the news at those moments. Why wouldn't these massive solar flares have an effect as well, especially if you're sensitive?
Right. And we're energy, right? We're all made of energy. So it makes sense that if this frequency is coming in and interrupting your electronics, it would interrupt, a human being.
And we humans, and animals too, are extremely sensitive to magnetic fields. And I used to watch every day, and I kind of got out of the habit of it, but I would look at a couple of different websites where they actually would talk about how the solar activity and the magnetic field between the sun and the planets could impact I mean, not just us, animals are impacted. You know, it sounds kind of crazy, but everything is kind of revolving around the electromagnetic field and the magnetic field. And earthquakes, they can actually fairly accurately say when we're going to have activity on the tectonic plates and have earthquakes and stuff based on what the magnetic field of the sun and all the planets, when they get in alignment, and how they impact it. So I mean, I don't really have a super scientific type of a brain, but wow, I mean, this stuff is so amazing how it impacts our world.
And don't you think a lot of people who say, oh, that's hooey, or I'm not affected by that, it's like they're not paying attention to it, or they're not even aware that's a possibility.
Yeah, that's what I
Was
think.
that an animal?
Yes, that was my yin yang kittens, because they have a black and white cat. And I always, actually, this is a great intro because I watch them sometimes, and when they get really agitated and such, like I know there's something going on, like solar flares, because I don't watch it all of the time, but it affects them, so they're a little bit more cranky, and possibly that was a little outrageous right there.
It actually
And
sounded like a tropical bird.
yeah, well, they're beating each other up, probably like 8 feet away from me, and so that, I think the solar flares and the magnetic pull in each one of our energy systems is shifting us down to the molecular structure, and it's uncomfortable, often exhausting, uncomfortable, because it's, instead of just the earth, it's doing it to each one of us. So we're supposed to, like, what, have lots of energy and feel good in the middle of these confusing shifts. So that was a little bit of a good intro. Thanks, Cats. How
We
embarrassing.
set that up. That was part of the show intentionally. I'm glad you two are bringing up the effects on animals, because animals are such sensitive creatures. I mean, look how they see spirit, and they see spirit when a lot of humans don't. They sense things being present. They are very sensitive creatures. So that makes sense that they'd feel it. I have a question that occurred to me this morning as I was brushing my teeth, and that was, do solar flares happen at a specific interval of time, or are they kind of random? Does anybody know?
There is a time called solar minimum, which the sun goes into periodically, and that's related to the sunspots on the earth, and the sunspots are also an integral part of all of this. So I would say yes, in a way. I mean, there are very predictable cycles within the life of our sun. So I think, one thing that I've noticed is, of course, we only really see the one side of our sun, we think, and a lot of times they will not be able to predict what's going on with these flares and eruptions because they're on the back side. And you'll hear it, they will announce on media, okay, we've just had a huge, whatever class it is, they have a designation for the amount of magnetic field and the size of these and how they impact us and all the planets, etc. And they'll say, okay, we just had a class, whatever it is, solar flare, and it's not going to affect us right now, but in 2 days it's going to impact our all of our technology and our phones and our it's pretty amazing. I think people assume that because somebody says, a scientist says, oh, well, this isn't going to really impact humans. They don't know that. And especially with people like us who are very magnetically sensitive. I mean, think about when you drive into Sedona and suddenly you come within range of the intense iron oxide there and the copper and everything. It's like, so I really think they have no clue what goes on with a lot of people.
What are some of the other kind of sensitivities that a sensitive person may have and be aware of that they would know they're likely to be affected by solar flares as well?
I think it throws off your equilibrium. I know for me, sometimes I start to get not as bad as Roz always, but sometimes there's just something off. I just feel like I'm off kilter, you know? It's not as bad as where you're like, you know, holding on like you're on a ship, but there's just something off in your balance. So that happens with me a lot of times. And it would make sense, you know, it's like, I always explain to my clients, like listening to music. I used to be really, really into heavy metal. And I love to listen. If I listen to heavy metal now, it's like I'm holding my ears, my chest, I can't breathe. I'm like, oh my gosh. So it is a frequency, like, you know, how the solar flares come in. From my understanding, it's like almost like a radio blackout, like something happens and then it's like this blackout. So we receive that frequency, and it would make sense that that frequency may throw us off kilter, you know, whether it's equilibrium, and mood swings is another big one that I see a lot.
Wow. Roz, would you go back to saying, like, what are the symptoms that you notice you have when there's solar flares? I just want to revisit that.
They vary a little bit. And one thing I always notice, no matter what's going on, but anything shifting magnetically, I will have severe vertigo. And, you know, this is like, we always think vertigo is some medical problem within us. Most people think that. So it was really helpful to me to figure out that my vertigo is very definitely connected somehow to the magnetic field on Earth, on the sun, the flares, etc. I know this doesn't resonate with a lot of people, but I think when you start to keep track of that, you'll really notice it. The other thing that I notice is right about the time they announced that the solar flares happened, right before that, I have difficulty concentrating. Like my focus becomes a little sketchy. I'm not very grounded, so I have to work on getting myself back into my normal, you know, frequency level. And I also notice it can make me really irritable. It can just make me really cranky, you know, like I'm sort of saying to myself, like, what the heck is going on? And you guys laugh.
I'm laughing because I'm thinking that usually means Roz is overdue for a meal and she's really hungry.
But
maybe it's solar flares.
My blood sugar's gone down, or somebody's messing with the magnetic field.
I've got that vertigo thing, and almost always, like, I'll say, oh my gosh, my vertigo is terrible. And Roz is with there's solar flares. There's solar flares. So like, okay, that makes sense. Hey, is there a great website that you can suggest to people that they can track solar flares?
I knew you were going to say that. And I'm
psychic, you must be.
I'm having, like, you know, senior moment, because I'm just drawing a complete blank. So we'll have to put it on. You'll have to
look it up. We'll add it to the show description. I didn't mean to put you on the spot like that, but it just occurred to me that you probably had something that notifies you, or knowing you and your YouTube love, you probably are like checking somewhere regularly.
Like
I get emails.
Underground weather would it be on there?
Sometimes they do show it on there. This is a website that comes out of Phoenix that actually is very specific to these magnetic shifts, the earthquake events, because the other thing that happens, and Ivory and I have discussed this before, prior to an earthquake in my area where I live, I think Ivory has them no matter where it's happening, but mine are usually specifically related to my area where I'm living. Prior to an earthquake, I will have, it's kind of an aspect of vertigo, but it's not really the same type of thing. I will actually feel like someone is shaking me. I can wake up in that state, and I can also, just be in my office and feel like somebody is start shaking me. And then within 2 to 3 days, we have an earthquake. So somehow that, they have done scientific measurements, and this website's pretty comprehensive on the things he covers, and they have a lot of scientific measurement of the electrical fields above the fault lines and where the tectonic plates meet. That actually verifies that there is an adjustment in the frequencies above those areas.
I don't feel it before. I just feel a jolt when it happens. And so for years, I tracked it, like when I felt it, the day, the time, and then I'd look up and see there was a massive earthquake, in Peru. There was a massive earthquake in, some very far away country. I'm like, what the world? But I feel them sometimes in the middle of the night or wide awake. Like I'll feel it so strongly, like someone kicked the sofa or kicked my bed and it's still shaking. But other people are just like, I don't know what you're talking about. I didn't feel anything.
Yeah.
So sensitive people can feel things that you might not even realize you're feeling it. I wanted to say, looking up at how solar flares affect a sensitive person, like they affect the entire central nervous system. It affects your brain equilibrium, which is why the brain activity, which is why vertigo comes into play. And that human behavior, mental, emotional, physical response. So the whole thing of feeling different, being in a different mood, it makes sense why all of those things, there's this long list of things, and I want to talk about it. Things we talked about a little bit, but anxiety is one of the ones that's at the top of the list of symptoms that you're being affected by solar flares. Sleep disturbances of any kind, stress, feeling overwhelmed, headaches or pressure in your head, feeling off or foggy headed, dizziness, feeling shaky, having exhaustion, which I know I felt, short-term memory problems, and nausea. So that's quite a long list of stuff that people could be feeling. And I think so much of it could easily be explained away by people who don't understand. They're not paying attention. They don't even know about solar flares, or they don't know that it's corresponding with that. So that's why we were thinking this show would be a good idea, because forewarned is forearmed. If you know solar flares are coming and you're sensitive to it, you can be on alert that, oh, I'm feeling that way because solar flares. There's a lot of other things in life that I think can relates to that too. If you know it's coming, you can prepare. If you know that you have seasonal affective disorder and we're coming into winter and you live in a place that's gray and cold and drizzly, you can be prepared for that and have kind of some tools on hand. So what are the ways that you ladies have found help relieve the symptoms of solar flares? Nothing?
For me, it's been just extra prayer and focus. Literally, because in my lifetime, it's not that I'm an expert on this, but there have been patterns throughout the years, like, oh, and the solar flares are more active, and then it comes into our energies unseen. So they affect the earth and the earthquakes and the waters and the air and the seasons a little bit. So let's just say maybe that happens to each human being. Like it pushes with an invisible force instead of us being balanced. It bows us and pushes against our own energy systems. And so in that, like this last week, I have been extremely stressed, and I just had to take a couple of days off. And with symptoms, this is weird for me because I'm kind of bouncy and I prefer not to sit down, but I am experiencing old symptoms of years past symptoms of physical things. And I'm like, ouch, like I don't even have that organ anymore. Why does it hurt? So it's like the unseen forces come in from the light and bows back into us some of those symptoms, and it's just exhaustion is my number one. So here's what I do. I mean, again, I'm not maybe perhaps an expert on everybody, but I have to sit down. I go, okay, and I have to sit down and focus and kind of keep praying and getting back into alignment with whatever is best, and really like to have compassion for all the rest of us who are, if you see someone else struggling as well, and go, oh, solar flares, and it's those magnetics, are just really, we can't see them, but they're adjusting around us. So of course it's going to affect us, and kind of get back into order, and wave at the people that you love and go, okay, and stay focused and grounded. Just keep grounding is what my prayers and grounding.
Have you found anything to be helpful, Roz, when you're experiencing symptoms?
I think that, my standard practice of going into my office, or, just getting very grounded in there, using either my grounding pad if I'm not going to be putting my feet on the ground, or, like just getting very calm and doing breath work, which I do every day anyway, but it's very noticeable how I really have to do that, because I get like Melissa, where it's difficult to work. You can't really work when you're off balance like that.
We're
So
feeling foggy headed. That's
yeah, I have to
impossible to
really
do our work.
settle myself and get in my frequency and be there.
There's this great list of things to relieve symptoms, and I don't think you ladies will be surprised by any of this. Number one was aromatherapy, putting good quality essential oils in a diffuser and just breathing it in. Salt baths. Gee, what a shock. Magnesium supplements, which I thought was good. Increasing water intake. That's my Alexa. It's possessed. So, it just goes off randomly. Increasing water intake, reducing caffeine, and doing extra meditation or exercise. So very basic things. I wondered, are we having solar flares right now? That explains it, because I was saying, you guys are talking about this, and I'm like, oh, because the vertigo's been so weird. Like I was driving in my car. I know people are going to be horrified to hear this, but this does happen. And I just looked one way and looked the other way. And then the world started spinning for 5 minutes, and I had cars behind me, and, it's impossible to drive safely like that. Or I'm just sitting still, and I turn my head, and boom, everything just goes. And the other thing for me is the exhaustion. I'll notice that I might need 2 naps in the evening, and I'll sleep all night long really solidly, which is rare for this girl. Usually like I'm a 5.5, 6 hours a night sleeper.
Mhm.
So I'll just be like in a sleep frenzy sort of through that time. And then all of a sudden those things will go away. So I'm going to have to start tracking it. Just a heads up for me, not to plan anything terribly important during vertigo Rama, because that's just not going to work.
Yeah, because you can't work. It's like if you have things planned, it's easier if you know, hey, it's going to come. And it's like with your cycle. Sometimes with my cycle, I don't really like to work a lot when I have my cycles because it's exhausting, it's tiring, and doing the work that we do, it continues to drain you further. So I find you can sort of plan around it. And I was going to add to that essential oils. I like to put them on the bottom of my feet and rub them into my feet. And that's really helpful too, when you're really feeling like you're sort of out there.
And if you wonder if that's really helpful, something that my niece did when she first started selling oils, and I had never really worked a whole lot with using essential oils like medicine, sort of. And so she rubbed this peppermint oil on the bottom of her 18-month-old's feet. And then like a minute later, she said, breathe in your aunt's face. And you could smell that peppermint oil had gone through her whole system that fast. And so since then, like I did know, like there's balancing oils and blends you can put on the bottom of your feet, grounding oil, all kinds of things that just really help if you're feeling scattered, and invigorating oils if you're tired because of the solar flares or whatever reason, even outside of solar flares, if you're just feeling kind of dragging around. But that's how fast it goes through your entire system, which is why they recommend putting on the bottom of your feet. But I know that sounds a little odd.
I think too, realizing that, it's not just, the solar flares affect so many of these other things, but it's not just that magnetic field. We're constantly dealing with the Earth's magnetic field. And we've had a lot of shifts in that in the last few years. And I think connected to all that, the Schumann resonance, has been kind of crazy over the last few years. And
I haven't noticed.
That's very related also.
We just had a huge big
The
blackout too, didn't we, in the Schumann resonance recently?
Yeah, people were really getting traumatized by the Schumann resonance. First it went really high. It's usually, I think it's at like 7.87 or something like that. And it went really high, and then it went kind of crazy. So the magnetic, the poles are not where they used to be. So that's the whole magnetic field of the Earth. So stuff's happening.
It's happening to us all around us all the time. But I think most people are like, I can't be bothered because I'm going to watch my favorite TV show, or I need to get to work, or, I need to go work in my yard. I got to go drink beer with my friends, whatever it is. Anything but paying attention to how you're being affected on all these different levels by things around you that you might, again, be completely unaware of. Just because you haven't heard of it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. Just because it doesn't affect you doesn't mean it's not affecting other people, because I know sensitive people are just sensitive across the board. I was actually thinking we should do a show about that because it's pretty crazy, mind-blowing, the different levels, like the different things that sensitive people are sensitive to. And I do think that translates to empaths and overall sensitivity. So we'll have to do a show about that, and this will come up in it too. But the solar flare issue, we're just finding that a lot of people they know there's solar flares. Most people, they just had no idea that it affected anything. They just thought it was something happening, millions of miles away. What does that have to do with me?
Well, let's face it, our educational system for people is the aspects of all these things are unless you choose to pursue learning about these things yourself, it's pretty limited in school unless you're pursuing physics on your own or something. And I feel like most people are content with their level of knowledge and understanding. They don't really want to pursue that much more, but yet they have all these things going on that they're not cognizant of. So I think it's really helpful to kind of get to the bottom of it and see what's going on in the whole. And look, I mean, that's astronomy, that's astrology, so it's not like it's not out there, but it's not very well taught in the traditional school systems.
And don't you think that that is another thing that comes down to being frequency related? That when someone raises their frequency, they're suddenly going to be aware of something. They'll hear about something they've heard before, but now they're at a place with their frequency where they're ready to learn about it. They're ready to understand how it could be affecting them. They're ready to look around, and they'll just notice things that have been there the whole time, but were like invisible to them. And I think that continues on and on up the frequency ladder. And solar flares is just one of them. I think that's true for me, because my first spirituality teacher would talk about solar flares back in 93, 94. And it went right over my head. I thought that had nothing to do with me, and then I meet Roz, and she's talking about, she really is very into energy and how it affects you in all different ways. And that's been a real eye opener, but I was ready to hear it. I was ready to address that. And I think
it's like when you read a book, right? It's like when you read a book and you get something out of it at that moment, but then you go back years later and you read it again and you're like, wow, I didn't know that held that type of information for me. And I'm always mind blown when that happens too, because I'm like, I didn't even know anything about that at that time, the first time that I read that. So I always think that that's funny. But you're right. It's like when we're ready for us to know, or it's time, or we're at that frequency, the things that come in resonate with us.
Did you ever buy a book and that happens, like you thought it was good, you read it again 15 years later and you're like, wow, and you're like, why did I buy, what led me to buy that book 15 years ago when I didn't know anything about any of this? So it must be like your angels going, get that book.
Or I buy books and I don't read them right away, right? They sit there forever, and then all of a sudden they hop off the shelf and want to be read, and it's like, oh, there it is.
I think it's planting a little seed in there for you to let it grow, let it germinate, and when it's time to harvest, you will. I see Carrie shaking her head. Yes.
Oh, hi, Carrie. I didn't know you were here. Carrie is one of my collaborators. We created sea therapy together.
Oh, cool. Cool. That's awesome. Any thoughts, other thoughts about solar flares, and any stories of how, like, you came to the realization that you were affected by it?
Over the years, in my creative ways of looking at things, I started looking at it like the solar flares and different aspects that we've been talking about today. It's almost like a domino effect. So if there are lots of solar flares, it touches many aspects of the world that we don't even notice. We how could we? And then not really looking at things through scientific ways. And who has time to look up the physics of everything every day, right? I kept, like, in my learning and expansion on this over, I think, like about 2 decades of like going, oh, something's up with this energetic, magnetic solar flare gig going on. I looked at it kind of like, as I do when I'm talking about doing psychic medium work, because there are different layers of energy, and I look at it like a radio frequency. So if your favorite radio station is on like 104.5 and your other favorite one is at 97.5, it's when these solar flares come in, it's a domino effect into your life. as well as the world around us, and it kind of shifts it, and it makes our radio stations go out of balance a little bit, and it's like, wait, like 104 point what? It's not even, it's like it sort of takes a minute. And so that goes through on these different levels of the earth and the air, the everything around us, and the waters, and the symptoms and things like that. And so we need to tune back in a little bit, like, hey, hold on, we'll get our antenna back in order, and the solar flares can kind of enhance our lives, and somehow, even if we don't know it, it's the scientific ways, enhance our lives in the future, and keep us going. But we stay in tune, our little antennas are back in order. So I kind of look at it that way, and that helps me go, oh, okay, I need to work on this symptom, or I'm feeling very discombobulated. I need to pay attention and tune in my own to the earth, and consequently, I love, like we were talking about, the Schumann resonances, and you can listen to the music, on YouTube, or I have a whole lot of tuning forks. So the solfeggio tones and the Schumann resonances are some of my favorites that help me ground and get back together again. So
That's
I look at
helpful.
it that way.
I just think it's helpful for people to know, like, what was the moment you knocked your microphone down to your lap? What was the moment that you realized that something was having an effect on you? Like, how did you figure it out? Because I think it helps other people figure out what's going on for them. And it can be a hard process because life is got a lot of distractions, doesn't it? Like microphones that will not stay standing. I've got to get a different microphone. I may have to hold this. It's being
It's
naughty.
almost like when you have like a pain. Like a good example is recently I had a really bad pain in my wrist, and I kept thinking it's emotional and it's not mine. I could tell, but if you don't know, you might think you have arthritis, or you might think that you banged it, but sometimes it could not even have anything to do with you. So I think becoming more aware of those things help us to decipher what exactly it is that's bothering us.
I think so too. Roz, did you know this connection early on? Because it seems like you've been so tuned into energy for a very long time.
I wouldn't say when I was young, I paid that much attention to it, but I became more and more aware of my level of sensitivity as my life, went on. And I think it was when I was in my late 40s and 50s when I really started to think, whoa, all this stuff is going on metaphysically. It's also going on in the realm of physics and all these other connections that I never saw. It's like what Terri-ann was saying. I never saw those as all connected. And I never realized my reactions to those things until I actually, when I moved to Sedona in 2004, my mind was kind of boggled, because I remembered things that happened as a child that there was just no explanation for. And fortunately, my mother was pretty chill on a lot of things. And she realized, she really realized something was going on with me that was out of the ordinary. And she would tell me, some of this is probably your imagination, but, you just need to pay attention. She used to always say that to me because I could go off. And I think it was probably when I really hit my true maturity in my late 40s and 50s when I started to really figure it out for the first time. Because, when you're young, you're like, oh, well.
Also, when you're young, you've got young kids and kids
Yeah.
that need your attention. And once you get past that, one of the pleasures of that is that you have more time to do introspective work, to figure out yourself better, what's happening with you on different levels. So it makes sense that it would be after your kids are young.
Yeah. Well, I think too, I recognized a lot of things in my children, and they taught me a lot because I saw things in my children that I had experienced. Um, the one thing I remember with my oldest son was coming to this shocking reality point of how he reacted to unseen energies and how sensitive he was to telepathic information. I mean, he was like a little antenna. That really got me to kind of start thinking, like, wow, I remembered things that had happened. And I realized that I had a lot of those same behaviors and began to connect it with not just, I mean, I wasn't even really connecting it with planet and sun magnetism or any of that at that point, but I could certainly look at what you were talking about, the seasonal shifts in personality. I mean, unfortunately, I grew up someplace where we had good weather almost all year. So I didn't have those shifts and experiences, but I do see them. You know, I began to really recognize all these little things going on. So I would have to say that God and my children were my best teachers.
Though my daughter is an amazing psychic medium, she is not sensitive. She'll be the first to tell you. She's the opposite of sensitive. Oh, goodness. She's a card for sure. You've been watching the Sedona Soul Sisters show. If you'd like more information about us or our services, please visit our website, sedonasoulsisters.com. Come back next week when our topic will be trusting your gifts. So you know you've got spiritual gifts and you're just not sure that you can really trust them. And that stops people from moving forward with what they want to do with their gifts, personally or professionally. So we want to help you break through that block. We'll be doing that next week. And in the meantime, we hope you have an enlightening week.
Enjoy.